We are live. Thank you, everyone, and apologies for that delay. Thank you all, computer geniuses who helped us get through my technical incompetencies or those of my computer. A thank you to our sponsors, who are so many. I don't know if I'm going to enumerate them all, but it's many of you. So thank you. I think more came in. Actually, well, I don't know. I think it's like a lot of you. So thank you. And if you haven't sponsored this class, we're listing the sponsors in the listing, I believe. But if you haven't sponsored the class, you can feel free to do so at the link in the chat. A reminder that it's not about the money. We don't care about money here, but they told me I have to ask for money. So you can also contribute in heaven by contributing to this class. We're studying the Zohar. I thought actually we would veer for 1 week, if you all are okay with it, from the teaching of the letters to the teaching of the Zohar about Shavuot, because Shavuot is tomorrow night, and I felt like that's timely. But I also felt that Shavuot is the one holiday where the teaching of the Zohar shapes the current practice of the holiday. And so it's not just there is a teaching about Shavuot, but the teaching about Shavuot came to define the modern observance of Shavuot for most people. So we won't normally do that because we could always veer to the topic du jour. We'll go in order, but I thought that today we would do that. Is anyone very upset by that? Especially after you finish the teaching of the letters while we're having technical difficulties, so it's even better. All right. So first I'll ask, is anyone familiar outside of the text with the Zohar's teaching about Shavuot that informs the modern practice so much?
Is it the Tikkun idea?
It is the Tikkun idea. What about that?
That you stay up all night because the sky's going to open up at midnight.
Okay, the sky. Okay, so Rabbi Comfort says you stay up all night because the sky is going to open up at midnight. Just want to clarify. You stay up all night because the sky will open up at midnight. Midnight is like before the end of the night.
But the idea that the angel of the Mishnah came to teach.
The angel of the Mishnah came to teach at midnight. Okay, good. Now we're talking. So the Zohar, the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which is fixing the evening of Shavuot, emerged as a custom that involves staying up all night and studying on Shavuot. And by a show of participant hands, who is familiar with the notion of staying up all night on Shavuot and studying late into the night? Right? So this is a common practice. Now, it should be noted that there evolved a modern midrashic reason for it that was often taught, which is that the Israelites overslept on the day of the receiving of the Torah. And that may be a commentary on the actual Torah text, where it says, Heyu nechonim, you should be prepared by Yom HaShlishi on the third day. And the Ibn Ezra, for example, among other commentators, notes that be prepared may mean stay awake all night the night before, to be awake for it in the morning. That's actually the commentary of the Ibn Ezra believes the plain meaning of the Torah text asked them to stay awake all night, I think. And so there became this notion that, well, they were supposed to stay awake and be excited, and they overslept. And that is recorded in the Magen Avram and some later legal codes. But way before that becomes quoted in the legal codes, the original text has to deal with the Zohar. And this Zohar, we're on the 8th page of the first chapter of the Zohar here. I'll read it as we do in the Aramaic to give you the feel, and then we'll delve into the actual back and forth in the English. So if you don't understand the Aramaic, don't worry. Everyone can see? Rabbi Shimon Ava Yosef v'la'e be'oraisa be'leila dechala ischabra beva'ala. Ditaninan kol inun chavraya dibnei hechala dechala. It's drichu behilela dechala. Is damanas meheve liyoma achra go chupa beva'ala lemeve ima kala hulela. Ulemech ma betikuna diiha it kanasta lemile beoraisa. Mitor lenavim uminavim leksuvim b'midrashos tekrayu v'raze dechachmasa. Begin di ileninon tikunen di la betachshita. Be'ihi ve'ulamesa alas ve'kaimas al resheon v'itkanas behu v'chadas behu kalahu leila. U'liyoma achra lo alas l'chapa ele behadai. Ilen ikrum b'nei chupasa. Ve'kevan ta'as l'chupasa kutchabril chushal alai hu mevarech lon me'ater lon bi'itraha dechala. Zaka chulakom. That's the first part of the teaching. So, switch the share. Translation. Rabbi Shimon, this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, was sitting engaged in Torah on the night when the bride is joined with her husband. Now, what do we mean the night when people may be familiar with the notion of Shavuot as a wedding. Shavuot is a wedding. A wedding, but normally the wedding is described as the wedding between God and Israel. It's the giving of the Torah, it's the entering of the covenant or the beginning of a marriage. But here it's a different wedding, as you may recall. So it's to understand, we're talking about the bride and the groom at this wedding. We're in the chart of Sfirot. The groom can be described as the Sfirot represented by Tiferet, and those that are connected to it. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Chod. Yesod represents the phallus, and Malchut, or the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the queen, immanent God. God is seen in our world. The oral law, the Mishnah, Israel, is described as Malchut. This means the actual emanation of God in our world, or the emanation of our world. The things we are, our actual world, a redeemed world, a perfect world, a beautiful world, a messianic world. So the groom is all of the upper intention, and the bride is the manifestation. So we're really talking here about a groom and a bride, which are all divine. The groom is one part of God's emanation, and the bride is the completion of God's emanation, which ultimately results in a union. They're talking about a wedding here. And a wedding isn't just a wedding with a chuppah. A wedding is an act of sexual union or creative energy flowing into the world. So again, we're describing not just some metaphor of a wedding, but like if God is creating, what's the wedding before creation? Right? that causes this all to be. Before a child is created, there's a wedding. So what's the wedding? So the wedding here is the part of the God that gives to the part of God that receives. The part of God that receives is the part that emanates existence. And so these take on stereotypical masculine and feminine gender phenotypes in the Kabbalah. Tiferet, the male, Malchut, the female. And so this is the wedding that's being described, the night when this wedding happens. Now, the night when this wedding happens is understood to be Shavuot. It's not mentioned explicitly in the text. It's just that he was engaged in Torah on the night when the bride is joined with the husband. But that is Shavuot. This is widely understood to be Shavuot. One other thing. Often, the written law is described as Tiferet. That's the law that God gives down on high from Sinai, the 5 books of Moses. God writes this law, and so it's given. But the oral law is the law that we develop through application, through study. The Talmud is the creation clearly of people, right? In other words, it's people and their argumentations, their traditions sometimes, but their argumentation. And so the oral law here takes on a broader notion of the Torah we create versus the Torah we receive. And so in this class, for example, when you speak, you're engaged in which kind of Torah? Oral Torah. So when they describe the day in which these two things are united or married, they also mean the time when the oral law and the written law came to be one. And that only happens when they're revealed to people and people have an active role in receiving them. So there's something about the act of Sinai that is revelation that immediately casts us as active participants. We are receiving the Torah. And that's the beginning of our working with and developing the oral Torah. And so it's the meeting of written and oral Torah comes to symbolize the meeting of God and people through Torah. So Torah becomes like dinner on a date, yeah? But the point of the dinner date isn't the food. You can have a great date with bad food, though a good cup of wine might redeem it. But the point is the date. and so this is the date, and the Torah almost becomes the meal or the restaurant. Maybe that's a good way to talk about it in this closed restaurant era of our date with God, or of the oral Torah's date. We're part of the oral. And so to Rabbi Confer's point, it's for this reason that the Mishnah becomes the angel that reveals. It's because this is the oral Torah is the part of emanation that we're involved with. And so that's the part that speaks to us. Now, on that night, Rabbi Shimon was learning Torah. For we have learned, all those companions initiated into the bridal palace need, on that night when the bride is destined the next day to be under the canopy with her husband, and we've already described who the bride and the husband are, to be with her all night, delighting with her in her adornments in which she is arrayed. So here, there is a sense in which we take the role of bridesmaids. In this wedding, right, there's God, Tiferet, and there's God, Shekhinah, and we are the bridesmaids. Adorning means dressing, like doing the hair and the nails and the jewelry. So the people are the bridesmaids to the Torah. It's an interesting idea, or to God. And so how do you do that? How do you be a bridesmaid? They describe what Rabbi Shimon would do. Engaging in Torah, from Torah to prophets, from prophets to writings, midrashic renderings of verses and mysteries of wisdom. These are her adornments and finery. So if we want to say how it is that we get the God, get the divine presence ready for her. Now, it's interesting to think about, I think it takes a jump for people. So I'll say this, because I can feel through the Zoom channel, you may be lost. It takes a jump for us to get a personified divine presence that's disconnected from God. You have to think of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, as this entity. And you really need to kind of formalize it almost as this, like, this beautiful woman who everyone has forgotten about. Rav Yosef Karo described her as a sick woman begging for help. And so you got the divine presence as a beautiful beggar secretly dressed in rags, hidden, unknown, waiting for a husband on a street corner. That's the image of the divine presence here. And what that means is that the world is unredeemed. It's like our world is structurally flawed. And so in one Talmudic account of it, like the sky isn't blue anymore and the grass isn't green because the temple is destroyed. Or it could relate to the Israelites in exile from the land of Israel. But fundamentally, what it means is that in our world, we live disconnected from the divinity, which ultimately connects everything in our world through a process of emanation. We live in a world which isn't unified, but disconnected. We live disconnected from each other, and we live disconnected from our higher selves, which are rooted in a divine emanation. Does that... So we live in sort of vertical disconnection and horizontal disconnection. Both are going on. And that's at the root of what we mean when we say the Shekhinah is disconnected. So the Shekhinah disconnected is a symbolic rendering of the theodicy of why bad things happen to good people or why they're suffering in the world or any of it. It's because the divine presence isn't connected. And so in this version, the ultimate task, which happens on Shavuot, the point of creation, is to connect the world to its source. Now, obviously, it is connected because it exists, but it exists in a state of apparent disconnection to us because of what we do to it. we cause the disconnection. You see, it's not just that it is disconnected. We cause the disconnection through our sins. There's an assignment here. But with the assignment of blame comes the promise of redemption. We fix the disconnection in the world. We are empowered to fix the structural problems of the world. In fact, the whole world was created for us to do that. It was created broken. And so this begins to mix with the metaphor of the Ari, of Shvirat HaKelim, that originally God created vessels, but those vessels shattered and they're broken shards, which the Hasidim talked about a lot. There's something about the intentional messed up nature of the world, which is by design for us to have an active role in the complete emanation of the actual final emanated thing, people fixing the world. So
you just mentioned two opposite things, I think. On the one hand, you said that the world is created in some state of brokenness, but a moment before that, you said we have to reconnect the world to its source because we're responsible for that disconnection. So can you just clarify that, elaborate on, they're not necessarily contradictory, but...
So I'll say it in the language of Lurianic Kabbalah for the moment. In that language, it's like God created a world that wasn't capable of receiving his goodness, or it's a version of this notion that God wanted to make a perfect world, but that itself was impossible, and the world couldn't contain his goodness. And I said both things that you say, and that they're both true, and they're not in contrast. So let me try and explain why. The world is created with our role in this version of it as primal. Our role in fixing or repairing the world or perfecting the world is crucial. So it sort of needs to be, if that's the idea, it needs to be created in some state of disrepair for us to be able to do that. Or another version of this that you'll see emerging from the Zohar in some places is this notion that like Adam and Eve were supposed to sin, which is why it's in the days of creation on Erev Shabbat. It's like in the story, they have free choice and they sin, but actually it's part of the 6 days of creation where things are just, God is just doing things. So there's some sense in which God preordains their willful sin in the creation week, because built into the structure of the week of creation is human sin and imperfection, which is crucial to the creation of a world we could repair. So is that getting at it a little bit? That's the notion here, I think. Now, how do we do that? So actually, we'd be moved first in many modern social justice contexts to like action. But they have a different idea. It's not through action, but it's through perception or a lens. Keep in your mind the sort of difference here between quietism and just inner spiritual work versus actual things, and that is a tension that I'm noting. The way they do it is by reading Torah, Nevi'im, the prophets, the Ketuvim, the writings, so the 3 sections of the Bible, Midrashic renderings of the verses, so the oral law, the mysteries of wisdom, the Kabbalah. These are her adornments and fineries. So the way you help the Shekhinah, the way I described it, a street beggar, God forgotten, somewhere hiding in the world, is through the study of Torah. So the way you get the bride ready is by studying Torah. I think it's worth reading one of the notes here. All night from Daniel Matt. On other nights, the companions rise at midnight and study Torah until dawn, chanting to Shekhinah. On this night of Shavuot, they adorn her all night long. This gets to Rabbi Confer's point. This all-night study ritual became known as Tikkun Leil Shavuot, or the Tikkun of the eve of Shavuot. The root Taken appears throughout the Zohar, ranging widely in meaning: mend, restore, correct, perfect, prepare, arrange, array, adorn, establish, institute. It doesn't involve fundamentally some idea of fixing something that's wrong. Okay. Now a word about that. Matt notes correctly that the Tikkun wasn't a study, it was a chant. It was a chant. They were chanting verses from all of these things in a like mantra-like fashion, right? Not like studying them in the way that we would seek to analyze.
Rabbi, does the Zohar have in mind a particular type of people or group of people who would be the participants in this? Is it all Jews, or is it just a select few who know something the rest of us don't?
This was a great debate among the Kabbalists, of which someone wrote a long academic essay. There were groups of Kabbalists that felt that this passage of Zohar should apply to all Jews, children, men, women, didn't matter, all Jews. And then there were groups of Kabbalists that felt that this was only for the Kabbalistic initiated. And actually, there was a great debate when the Tikkun became of new fame again in the mid-16th century, after the year 1533 specifically, when it took off, there's a great debate about whether this should be done in all congregations or should only be done in certain select groups. But I will say that the custom sort of became that it was done, every shul anywhere, Everyone's doing a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Now, few people are studying the Zohar and the source of that Tikkun Leil Shavuot, but everyone's doing the thing. So just to understand, when they read the verses, they were reading them with an intention that liached kudsha brichu shchinte, as they said it, to unite Tiferet, or this part of God, and the Shekhinah, to fully restore God's presence here, connected with the emanation above, through the chanting of Torah. So there's something about Torah itself, which is the way to do that. And so it wasn't about the study of the verses, but what it was about was the intention behind the chanting of the verses, which is a different sort of thing. Now she enters, escorted by her maidens. This is the Shekhinah, going to her wedding, right? So you can imagine when she enters, just imagine the scene. She, the bride, enters the wedding isn't just a happenstance thing. I don't know, what the wedding practice was specifically in Spain when this passage was written. I'll just put it out in that way. But one can imagine that for a long time, when brides came and everyone stood, or there was an honorable moment of the wedding, yeah? And so she enters, escorted by her maidens. These are the people walking the bride down the aisle, standing above their heads. So it's not just walking down the aisle, like they're there and she's standing on them, right? So they both take a prominent role in walking the bride down the aisle. But also there's this sense of even greater glory than a normal bride. Adorned by them, she rejoices with them the whole night. The next day she enters the canopy only with them. Now, who does a normal bride enter with? I think that's an important question.
Parents.
Her parents. So this bride enters only with the people that have done the Tikkun. So that's kind of interesting, because that perceives of us in the role of the parents of the Shekhinah. And we normally think about it in the opposite, like God is a mother or father figure. But here, the text actually places us in the role of parents to Shekhinah. We would normally think of ourselves as banim atem Hashem, to children, you're children to God. But this posits us in the role of God's parents, the one that teach and instruct and adorn and get ready and pay for the wedding. So I'll just leave that radical flip of imagery open. Yeah.
So just wondering about the parent business, because it says she's escorted by her maidens, and I can't see what his note is, but who are the maidens? Are we maidens?
I think the plain understanding is that we're the maidens. So here he says, okay, the Matt note says when she enters, that's not the wedding's the next day, but she enters the house of study at night for the Tikkun with her attending angels. But who are the maidens? Members of the canopy? I think we're the maidens.
Uh-huh.
That's how I'm reading it. she enters the canopy only with them, and they are called members of the canopy. We're like, think of it as the bridal party. I think that's the best modern translation, right? They're called the bridal party. So there's a formal notion to it also, yeah? Like even today, bridal parties can have a formal notion. I know weddings today are different. They're like over Zoom. But when weddings weren't over Zoom, which is sad for those people, but cheaper, a lot cheaper. There's a bridal party, and they're like listed in the program. As soon as she enters the canopy, the Blessed Holy One inquires about them. Now, what's involved in inquiring about them? There's an idea of like caring for them, right? Blesses them and crowns them with bridal crowns. Happy is their share. I'll note that from here, there does derive a kind of concept that a bride on a wedding day has the power to give blessings and channel this energy, which is still a popular custom, I think, among many Jews. The bride can give you a blessing, or that suddenly the grape juice or the wine or whatever they use for the blessings, the wine usually can be, right, it can be, have like these mystical qualities. Rabbi Shimon and all the companions were singing the Song of Torah. Here, the Song of Torah probably, so one of the things it means is that the way in which they're now going back and describing the quality of the study. What was the quality of the study? They were singing it because Torah is a song. Song, of course, means something more than just musical. There's a sense of harmony to it, of working together and not at odds. There's the literal sense that they were chanting it with the truck, with the musical notation. There's also the notion that in Deuteronomy, the Torah is referred to as a song, this song. There's something with the Torah which isn't it has a song-like quality to it in many ways. Innovating words of Torah, important also because it highlights their sense of agency in this. On the one hand, there's this submissive chanting of the received written Torah, but then they're also innovating words of Torah, which is actually kind of the opposite, right? Of inventing new meanings and insights and coming up with their own Torah, which speaks to their active role or the role in oral Torah. So these are related, receiving, chanting what's received, and then innovating, having as it comes through the emanated person. Now, the irony in all of this, of course, is that the person is emanated by the Torah. There's a sense in which the Torah is the blueprint of the world, but then the person emanates Torah. And so there's a sense in which we're involved in our own self-creation through acts of perception. Rabbi Shimon and all the other companions rejoiced. Rabbi Shimon said, "My children, happy is your share. For tomorrow the bride will enter the canopy only with you. For all those arranging in her adornments tonight, rejoicing with her, the Shekhinah, will be recorded and inscribed in the book of memory." This is a book referred to with some commonality in the Zohar, a place where all things that happen by people are written down. The Blessed Holy One blesses them with 70 blessings. Again, anytime we see the number 70, it's not just the general completion of 70, but the sense that there are 7 lower sfirot: kindness, strength, balance between them, active persistence and striving, submissive gratitude and acceptance and awe, and the collection of the balance of all of these things into a manifestation of reality. These sfirot, so there are 7. So the 7 times 10 represents the sort of infinite quality of them. And so they're blessed with the full blessing of godliness or of presence, but full presence, and full emanated presence, and crowns of the supernal world. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. Any questions or comments thus far? I realize it's a little vaguer or less than some of the things we've done to date. There's a second part to the teaching, but I wanted to at least.
I could maybe ask just a grammatical question, because we have the word tikkun repeated variously a few times throughout this passage. How would you, I'm on the Sefaria, looking at the English, and they're translating as corrections. Is that how you would translate that?
A tikkun is a ceremony meant to repair. So I think you can't ignore that it's a ceremony. That's crucial. And actually, the tikkun has a text. So one thing to note is that the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which actually I went looking. So it's funny. This is actually a good showing of it. So I went in the Koren Shavuot Machzor, one of the Machzor, and for the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which by the way is available as a free download from their website. If you just enter your email and subscribe to their mailing list and get multi-day promotions, 20% of this, 10% of that, but you get a free download of their Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And their Tikkun Leil Shavuot is a collection of midrashic sources about Shavuot, which is interesting. But if you go to the art scroll, the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, I'm in it right now, actually, so what it is this. It's from each parsha of the Torah, they take psukim, and from each book of the prophet, and from each of the writings, and then they mention midrashim, and they mention mystical workings. So it's exactly what's described in the Zohar. And actually, they go even deeper than that, because they give you the first three and the last three psukim of each book or of each parsha of the Bible. And so the first three and the last three are meant to symbolize, when reading them, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Chod, Yesod. That's first three, last three. That's where they're doing the first three. Or they give you of the biblical books. And that's because the biblical books are symbolized by Tiferet. But for the Mishnah, they just give you, the first and last Mishnah of each book, because Malchut doesn't have this element of the seven, right? It's just sort of receiving from above and below and creating. Every sphere has a part that it receives from other spherot, and then the part of it that's emanative as well, in the way of emanation. So actually, what's intended by the tikkun that's written is something like when you read the first pasuk of Breshit, you think chesed. When you read the second pasuk, you're channeling gevura. When you read the third pasuk, you're balancing them. And then the last three of the book. And then eventually, when you're done doing that again and again with all the biblical books and energizing the system, you start reading the Mishnah, right? And actually, that's when the revelation happens down here. So it's actually, the Koren and the Art Scroll represent two very different systems of Tikkun Leil Shavuot. One is Tikkun Leil Shavuot. This is an answer to your question, Joe. It's just very belabored, like rabbinic. And that's not a compliment to rabbis. The Koren represents Tikkun by study. Perhaps we could say, the way modern people relate to it better, analysis and study. But actually, the Art Scroll Tikkun, though it doesn't give instructions for it, it just lists the psukim, is more like, let's chant and empower the sfirot as per the original Tikkun. So Tikkun here means a ceremony to get this all going. That's what Tikkun means, a ceremony to get it all going.
Rabbi, can I just do a show and tell? A number of years ago, when an elderly man passed away at Temple Emmanuel, their family gave me a bunch of books. And one of them was 1836 version of a Tikkun Leil Shavuot and Hoshana that I treasure and had rebound. And it's really quite an interesting little piece that starts with the story of the angel coming and teaching them in the middle of the night. Just my little show and tell, since I'm mentioning Tikkun collections, a special volume on my shelf that I pull out once a year for Shavuot.
Okay, so I will direct people then, with Rabbi Confer having said that, Chabad did a good translation, actually. And I actually put it out in my study guide that I sent out at CBS if you're on our mailing list. So there.
Right, yes, I saw that.
So I put a translation, but This was largely ignored from the Zohar. I'm trying to find it, but whatever. It's on. I'll get it to you if you want it. But the point is, this was largely forgotten until Rav Yosef Karo decided to do this tikkun again in the year 1533 in Salonika, and a Mishnah of the angel, an angel of the Mishnah revealed itself to him as a Magid, as a divine messenger, and basically said, "I'm the divine presence, and I am abandoned, abused, thrown in the garbage dump, and you have restored the crown," and gives instructions there. And it's a remarkable letter about what happens that year. But that's really the first time the tikkun happens. So you have, some length of time between whenever the Zohar's conception of the tikkun, which was likely older, is conceptualized until it becomes done. So actually, this is more of like an idea before it's a practice, which is an interesting thing to think about. Okay, we'll do a little more, maybe like 5 more minutes just for the next teaching. Uh-oh, where'd my Zohar go?
Actually, rather than move ahead, I do have a question for the last couple minutes. Just
Yeah.
look at the note 373. We've just been told, for all those arranging her adornments tonight will be recorded and inscribed in the book of memory. And this is, the note says, the celestial book in which all human actions are recorded. But later in this passage, that it's identified with Yesod. So I find that really fascinating. A book of memory, you think, is written after the fact, right? It's recording the actions after they occur. But somehow this book is identical with Yesod, which precedes creation, right? Like that's the foundation of creation. So I don't know if I have a question or comment on that, but there's, I wonder about the philosophical implications about the nature of time, that a book of memory can be written in advance of the creation. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. So I think just remark, I'm very questioning.
That's a great question. So the linking of Yesod and memory is storied, actually. And that in part relates to a conception of childbirth. Now, actually, we're going to go a little off topic here, but there were different conceptions about how it is that kids come to be born in different cultures. Some of them assumed, my apologies for veering off here, but it's a necessary framework to understand the Kabbalah. Some societies assumed that, and there are technical academic terms for this that I forget, that basically the person that's going to be created exists in the semen, as it were, but that the female is just a host, as it were. Apologies for treating women like space aliens here, invaded by the semen. I'm doing that, but that's the way it was conceived, right? That basically it's the male content that is, and it's actually for that reason that men are called Zachar, which is related to the memory. There's a conception rooted in this cultural understanding that memory, or the passing down of, they wouldn't use the term genetic content, but of traits from generation to generation, and of wisdom and of knowledge and all of that, is fundamentally masculine, as represented by the nature of a person primarily being in, and their code primarily being in the semen, or like the semen becomes the person. There are other societies, now there are some societies that actually believe that multiple men contribute to that, or even that there are even societies where multiple men would sleep with a woman while she was pregnant, believing you needed to keep feeding that sense. And actually you could have many fathers, or one father. So there are different versions of the male is everything. And some of them are a one-time male is everything. Some of them are continuous ongoing male is everything. Some of them are one father. Some of them are many fathers. But there are other societies believe that everything is basically in the female. See here the Na of the Himalayas for the best example of a society like this, where everything is female and actually the men are irrelevant. And there's actually no paternity because men are irrelevant. They have no conception of a father. And that's an extreme version, but the historical outlier. Obviously, we know there's a sperm and an egg. We know, it's in a different sense, but they didn't have that knowledge. So the linking of Yesod, or the phallus, or the masculine, or the part that ultimately collects this long gives with memory, is because creation, there's a deep past and a deep future, and they're fundamentally linked in some way beyond space-time. Yeah, there's a sense in which creation started with this keter, with this desire, which will only be actualized in a messianic future. And there's a deep link between the desire of God beyond time, or even human understanding in the past, or the ratzon, or the crown, symbolized here, and the ultimate end, which is a manifestation of something that already existed here, or even before here. And so there's a sense in which the memory of future occurrences is already sealed and actually deeply rooted in something that's deeply in the past, but not the historical past, the ontological past. So, and Yesod, which is the nexus between emanation into what will occur, and all of the stuff above it, which manifests from Keter, is actually the place where that memory becomes fraught, or potentially disconnected, or where the Shekhinah goes into exile. And it's when the Shekhinah goes into exile, or when we forget who we are, or we forget the kind of world we live in, that memory becomes crucial in observing the covenant, and in remembering this sort of deep thing, which is known in a deep sense. So that's the sense of memory that we're talking about, an awakening to what's true, deeply or inherent. It's like remembering who we are, as opposed to, there are actually two different terms for this sort of memory. There's some, there are two sorts of memory people speak about: memory you know, and memory you recall as a fact, right? Like, I know that, what do I know? I don't know, that on July 4th, 1776, we declared our independence, right, from the British. But I wouldn't experience it. I have no viscera of that experience. I've read it, and I take it to be true because other people I trust all believe it. But I wasn't there. Then there's memory I know. Then there's memory I know not because it happened, but it's innate to who I am. So this is a sort of self-knowledge memory, as it were. I don't know if that wasn't a fully formulated thought. That requires more formulation, but.
So I know we're closing, but other than free will complications with this picture, that's a very awesome picture that you just sort of sketched out. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, so I think that's the sense we're working with memory here. So when we talk about Sefer HaZichronot, I don't think we're talking about like a book of recorded history. Right. Actually, even though they're recording the actions of all humans, the recording of the actions of all humans, these actions, what's the merit of recording these actions if all actions are recorded? I'll ask it in the sense of reading the Zohar. Who cares that it should be recorded? Everything is recorded. If they spat on Shavout, or decided to have a feast eating pork, right, that would be recorded in the book of memory. So the answer is no. The book of memory is something that actualizes the spheriotic system, right? And so it actually brings that into being. That's the memory.
Great. All right. Thank you.
So maybe we'll close here. Next week we'll do the second part of the teaching, just to finish the teaching, even though it'll be after Shavuot. Because you could bring the korban, the Shavuot sacrifice, if you missed it for the a bit after. So maybe we'll stretch in that way. But I hope that this teaching can offer, and I'll end on this note, a practical reframe for Shavuot. One thing to note, that in 1532, when Yosef Karo and folk tried to do the Tikkun, they didn't have a minyan. And actually, that's the first thing the angel says to them, probably in Rabbi Confer's book. You didn't have a minyan. Where are the others? So the next day they go and yell at people that didn't show up. But there is a sense in which, while a group helps this study in some way, that's not essential to the Tikkun. The other part of the Tikkun is, if you're going to stay up and learn on Shavuot night, can you think of it as adorning the bride, or causing the divine presence in our world, the awesome divinity in our world, to be more beautiful? And what would it mean to try and study, not with a quality of understanding or rigor or knowledge, which is based in us, but a quality of subservient beauty, right? Like when we study, it's an act of, I want to learn. But here their act is a selfless act of, I'm going to help the bride. It's all about the bride on this day. It's all about the divine presence. So what would it look like, even if we're just studying a text, to do it in a manner that says, I'm doing it for the sake of the divine presence. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for God in the world. I'm doing this for God. It's an act of kind of submission, even if it's an active kind of thing of, you know, and the hairstylist can get creative, mind you. But it's for the bride. So what would it look like to use our resources and talents in a sort of religious service? So I think there's a religious element to the Tikkun of avodah, of service, that can get lost in our modern versions. And even if you don't do the Tikkun, like read the things they read in the mystical way they did, one could approach study in a way that like it's an offering. And I think that's what they're going for in the Tikkun. So I leave you with that as a kind of way, if you like, to approach Shavuot. And I hope this teaching was edifying. But now you kind of know, what's the Tikkun in the Shavuot? All these articles refer to the Zohar's Tikkun. This is the Zohar's Tikkun.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, thank you. Very appropriate.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.
Andrew, I'm glad you joined us. Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you, Rabbi. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you.